All right. So my name is Hayley Krugar, and I'm here from a nonprofit organization called the Ethical Choices Program. What we do at ECP is we look at the impact of our food choices on the world around us. And so certainly we study a variety of things, everything from our health to environment to the animals that we share our planet with. Because you guys are studying what you're studying currently, the environment and modern agriculture is what I was asked to come in and talk about. So certainly we're going to talk about our environment, make some connections there. But it's difficult just to talk about your environment because in order to really make sense of what's going on, we also need to look at the complex systems that it takes food to make its way to our plates, which is why we're going to begin with modern agriculture so we can really make some of those connections. Before I go any further, certainly my job today is not to make your food choices for you. I am not here to tell you what to eat or what not to eat. Those are your choices and your choices alone. You guys decide what you snack on, what you make for meals, etc. Hopefully, what I have to share for you will add on to some background knowledge that you already have. And if any of this information is new, I encourage you before you make any changes, before you do anything, do some additional research. Look up on any of the things that we talk about today. Certainly add those to what you're learning in class as well. I ask a lot of questions. Feel free to shout out those answers. But this is also not the kind of presentation where you have to save your questions or even your thoughts to yourself. You can go ahead and raise your hand at any time to add those to the discussion. Anytime you guys have anything to add, the more beneficial it is not only for you, but for me as well. Then I'm just not talking to myself. And so we're going to start with the image that's on the screen. What is this a picture of?
Us supporting the globe.
Us supporting the globe. So the globe, the planet, Earth, what is that to us? Home. What's the state of our home right now? What's the condition? Bad. In what way?
Resources are being used too fast and pollution.
So we're talking about natural resources, fixed resources, maybe some sustainability issues. You also mentioned pollution. What else? Global warming. Anything else? We're actually going to talk about all of those things. And believe it or not, there's one industry that actually has an impact on all of those things that you mentioned, and that has to do with our diet, specifically the animal-based products that we consume. So we're really going to look into how does food production affect our environment? How is it that what we eat impacts pollution, impacts climate change, global warming, those kind of things? In order to do that, we really need to look at the current demand. We need to take a look at how much of this are we consuming so that we can really connect those issues. So the statistic that you see on the screen represents land animals. Land animals are cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, etc. that we consume for food. Aquatic animals are measured by the ton, so we don't have those individual numbers. It reads more than 8 million land animals are killed for food every what? How often do we think that is? Year. I want you to think worldwide.
Worldwide?
Day.
Every 4 hours.
Every 4 hours. That's very specific. Every 4 hours, we have a year. Did you say every day? Month? It is every hour.
What?
Worldwide, you were very close with your 4-hour projection. Worldwide, in order to meet our current demand, we are looking at 8 million animals an hour. That is pretty big. It's a huge, huge number. So what do you guys know about the industry that would be able to meet that demand? Anyone know the name of it? Who's heard of factory farming before? A couple of you. So factory farming is the industry that is able to meet that demand. Now, when we think of the word factory, what do we think about? Manufacturing. What's the point of a factory? Like, why do we have them? Mass production, right? And we're not only mass producing a product, but we're doing so very quickly and very efficiently. Now, when you think of the term farming, chances are you don't think about mass production. You don't think about those things like snack manufacturing facilities or car manufacturing facilities. You're really thinking, again, of our other industries, right? So really what has happened over the course of the last several decades is that we've taken two very unlikely industries, the idea of a factory and the idea of that farming, and we've combined them together to create what we call modern animal agriculture. The reason we refer to it as modern animal agriculture is because your great-great-grandparents would not recognize the system that we currently have in place. With regard to modern animal agriculture, we raise as many animals as possible of a single species in as little space as possible, as quickly as possible. So think of those fundamental things that it comes to when it comes to a factory. This just involves animals. And so when we're talking about resources, we want to use as few resources as we can. Resources cost money. The more money you have to spend, the less likelihood that you're going to make a profit, or you have to kind of outprice your product and then people are not going to buy it. The map that you see on the screen represents modern animal agriculture throughout the United States. It's helpful to take a look at this map just because as we make connections to our environment, we can remember just how widespread it is, at least in the United States. The key that you have on the bottom left represents what factory farming is. So again, when you're looking at factory farming, it has everything to do with the number of animals on that farm, and that kind of qualifies exactly how is this a factory farm. Now you can certainly see we are pretty inundated in the Midwest, Illinois, Wisconsin, etc. Those are areas that are pretty heavy when it comes to that idea of modern animal agriculture or those factory farms. Now when we look at the idea of a factory farm, a slaughterhouse, a hatchery, can I go up to those anytime I want, knock on the door and ask to look around?
No.
Why not?
Because there's stuff they don't want us. They're doing that they don't want us to know.
So maybe they don't want us to see, we perhaps don't want to see. What might be some other reasons?
Sanitary reasons.
Safety reasons, absolutely, right? It's also private property. We also have something called an ag gag law, and an ag gag law makes it illegal to document what goes on inside hatcheries, slaughterhouses, and factory farms. Today you guys are going to get a very brief look into the industry that brings you 95 to 99% of your animal products. Thank you for watching the video. I realize for some of us, certainly when it's the first time we've seen information like that, it can be challenging to watch. Certainly when we are able to watch information like that, it becomes information that makes us a more informed consumer. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or curiosities about anything that they saw or want anything explained? If something does come up or kind of as you process that, if you want something explained, please let me know. Even if it's after class, I'd be happy to explain it to you. So when we're thinking about how does this affect our environment, certainly pollution comes to mind. When we tie that into modern agriculture, we certainly have to look at animal waste. We have to look at how it is stored, what it's used for, and kind of the excess that we have. So the graph that you see on the screen represents how we have 40 times more animal waste in our country. This is just the United States than human waste. Certainly when we have animal waste, what are some uses we have for it? What can we do with it? Use it as fertilizer, right? So we take that animal waste, it's treated, and then it can be reused as fertilizer. However, when we have a number that is as high as 335 million tons, we simply do not have a need for that amount of fertilizer, so we kind of come up with some other ways to store it or use it. What you see on the screen is an image of egg-laying hens. They are raised on battery cages. Those battery cages allow for all of that waste to fall below. So what you see on the bottom of the screen in the industry is coined as poultry litter, but essentially it is chicken waste. And so certainly we can use some of that, treat it, and use it as fertilizer. But poultry waste, or poultry litter rather, is also used to feed cows. And so we have obviously a resource that is pretty expensive to feed a cow. That's going to be one of the largest resources that it takes to raise a cow, is to feed it. So I can use a free product. At the same time, I can eliminate that product from having to be stored. The other way that we store waste that is untreated, that we don't have a use for, is in a cesspool or a lagoon. So these are gestation crates. Gestation crates house mother pigs that are pregnant, and so they are raised on concrete slatted floors. Those holes or slats in the concrete allow for all of that waste, feces and urine, etc. to be dropped below, and then again it is pumped out into these big pits in the ground. You saw that in the video as a way of these lagoon storages, these cesspools. And so as you can see, even with this image, these cesspools and lagoons are pretty full. And so obviously we're not going to stop producing pork. And so we hook up high pressured hoses and they spray that untreated waste around the nearby property. Certainly that causes a significant amount of pollution. You're spraying untreated waste into your soil, which contaminates your soil. It then gets into your groundwater. Absolutely the air that we are breathing has that contaminated waste as well. As you can see here, there's a river that flows along the top of that property. If you put untreated waste into a body of water, what happens to the plants or animals in that body of water? They die, right? So we're eliminating a large species that way as well. Keep in mind when we're talking about things like lakes and rivers, they're all connected. They all eventually end up into our oceans. So there's a significant amount of agricultural runoff that ends up in our oceans, which creates dead zones. A dead zone is basically an area where nothing survives. We have a dead zone in New Mexico the size of New Jersey, in the Gulf of Mexico the size of New Jersey. So the way that we store waste is pretty considerable and a huge problem. Because of this, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN tells us that the livestock sector is one of the top 3 contributors to the most serious environmental problems, including water quality degradation at every scale from local to global. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to these waste lagoons or these cesspools, think of any area of our country that has been hit by a natural disaster. Think about any area that's been flooded. This stuff is just open air. It's open storage. So when you look at like Hurricane Florence that was down in North Carolina last fall, all of these waste lagoons and cesspools were also flooded. So any of that contaminated water that's running through cities and towns, etc., not only the gas and the oil that's kind of running through and contaminating it, but you're talking about animal feces and waste that's also being contaminated. Simply, it's open air storage. We're going to transition a bit into a natural resources. One of your classmates mentioned certainly that's an issue when it comes to our planet as well. We have these resources that are fixed. We only have a certain amount left, and so we need to kind of figure out how much of that is being utilized. Now, what do you think those resources would be? There's 3 basic resources you need to raise an animal for food. What would those be? Water. What else? Food and last? What do we need? Food, water, and? Shelter, right? Or land. And so when it comes to those natural resources, animals need the same thing. So in order to fully understand the impact of these resources, we also need to look at population. So currently we have 7.6 billion people on our planet. Any guesses as to how much livestock we raise every year? It's about 10 times that amount. We have 70 billion livestock on our planet worldwide. It's a pretty big number that are using those same resources that we need as well. So let's start with water. I want you to consider the scenario that's on the screen. Does it take more water to eat a pound of beef or to shower every day for 3 months? It's not really that tricky, but yes, you would be correct in that it is eating a pound of beef. We tend to think that it would definitely be that showering, but it is eating a pound of beef. So how they came to this conclusion, it takes 100 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of grain. Keep in mind that grain has to be irrigated. It takes 750 gallons of water to produce a gallon of milk. Why does it take so much water to simply produce just 1 gallon of milk? Because why?
Replenish the cow.
The cow's drinking water, right? So when you're talking about dairy milk, you're talking about a dairy cow. A dairy cow has to be pregnant in order to produce milk, and so she's drinking for 2. So she drinks about 50 gallons of water per day, but she also eats 25 pounds of grain per day. So not only the water that they are consuming, it is also the water needed for those crops. Any guesses as to how much water it takes to produce a pound of beef?
2,000.
Not quite that high, and almost.
2,000.
It is 2,500 gallons of water. So for those of you that shower every day, roughly around 10 minutes, you are using less than 2,500 gallons of water over the course of that 3 months. In order to make that pound of beef, not only is it the grain and the water, but you're talking about water needed to clean things like transport trucks, slaughterhouses, factory farms, etc. So it's pretty considerable. So here we have this resource of water, and certainly if you wanted to conserve water, you could stop showering for 3 months if you wanted to, but the other option you would have certainly would be to eliminate that pound of beef from time to time, and you would also be conserving that resource. When it comes to our food supply, it is essentially shrinking. We have a very inefficient system in place currently in order to feed us. Now, I mentioned a bit ago that it takes 25 pounds of grain to feed a cow every single day. However, if you take that 25 pounds of grain and you feed it to people, you could feed about 250 people. For every 25 pounds of grain you feed a cow, you only get 1 pound of ground beef in return. That's your feed conversion ratio, essentially measuring the input to the output. And so how many people can you feed with a pound of ground beef? That's a big burger. but essentially you're looking at, depending on the meal, a family of 2 to 4, right? And so when we're looking at this resource, you could take it and feed 250 people. You could feed it to a cow and feed 2 to 4. It is a significant difference. Because of this, we do have a huge world hunger problem. 1 in 9 people go to bed hungry every night. Unfortunately, children are the most affected by world hunger. Again, if we kind of look at that resource, worldwide, consumption is about 50-50. In the United States, we are a very meat-centric diet, and so our diet actually requires about 70% of the grain that is produced goes directly to livestock versus to people. If we shifted that a little bit and fed more grain to people than to animals, we would actually be able to address world hunger and allow for more people to be eating it. Land, of course, as we know, is a fixed resource. We're not going to wake up tomorrow and see new parcels of land to do what we want with. What we have is what we have. However, we have begun cutting down our rainforests and clearing our savannas to make room for animal agriculture, whether it be that crop that needs to be fed to animals or the space in general for them to be housed. So 80% of the deforestation worldwide is a direct driver of animal agriculture. A couple other drivers of deforestation are soy, palm oil, and wood. However, if you take palm oil, wood, and soy, combine them together and compare them to the deforestation that is needed for beef, you're still going to see that the largest driver of cutting down our rainforest has to do with animal agriculture. Cows require a lot of space, they require a lot of grain, etc. Now, why do I need to care about the rainforest? It's not here, not in Wisconsin. Why should I care? Animals, right? We're talking about biodiversity. It is the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world. There is nowhere else you're going to find more plant or animal life. We are eliminating about 137 species every single day as a result of deforestation. They simply have no place to be and no place to go. Another thing to consider would be our indigenous population. If you look back several hundred years, you're going to see a pretty massive population. Today you see about 200,000 indigenous people left in the rainforest. Their homes are literally just being destroyed, and they are even fighting their governments. They're fighting cattle ranchers and oil developers with very little success. And lastly, something that you might not consider or think about has to do with medicine. About 25% of the Western pharmaceuticals that we take in the United States to make us feel better were actually derived from rainforest ingredients. Unfortunately, we've only studied about 1% of the plants or the flora in the rainforest, so we're essentially cutting down and eliminating these species before we know whether or not they could be of benefit to us. Now, certainly when that first image came across the screen, that hands holding the planet, one of the first things that most students will say is an issue is climate change or global warming. It is arguably the largest threat our planet has ever faced. And so when we're looking at climate change, we're looking at the rising level of greenhouse gases being trapped by our atmosphere, and our planet is warming. Now, that has very wide-ranging impacts, one of them being melting polar ice caps. Now, certainly you've probably seen those viral images of the polar bear losing their habitat due to those melting polar ice caps. They're simply losing their space. But an impact that it has on the human population has to do with rising sea levels. As those ice caps are melting, our sea levels are rising. They rise of about 1/8 of an inch per year. Probably doesn't sound like a whole heck of a lot, but if you are living on a coastal town, it's going to bother you because you're going to be underwater. So even places like Miami in the United States are under threat of being underwater eventually. So those ice caps melting are considerable. Now, when it comes to our carbon footprint, what we are told to reduce our carbon footprint, what industry does it usually revolve around? Transportation, cars, right? And so we're often told to carpool, to walk, to ride the bus, to buy an electric car, all of those kind of things, right? Certainly not going to stand here and tell you not to do those things. Those are definitely important. Anything we can do anywhere we can is important. However, what we don't often hear anything about is what we've talked about so far this morning, and that has to do with the animal agriculture industry. Does anyone know what gas a cow produces? Who's heard of methane before? Methane is what a cow produces, and methane is far more powerful than anything that your car is producing. So I could take the entire transportation sector worldwide, that's every car, bus, plane, truck, train, combine it together, compare it to animal agriculture, and the impact on animal agriculture on climate change on our planet is far more significant than anything we are driving. Now, one of the areas we haven't talked about today is our oceans. Much the same as we have industrialized land animals, we have done the same with our oceans as well. We are commercially overfishing our oceans at a significant rate. What you see on the screen is a trawling net. Trawling nets are about 1.5 miles long. When opened wide, they're about as wide as a football field. And so if I'm dropping a net this big into the ocean and I'm going for bluefin tuna, am I only going to get bluefin tuna? No, I'm going to get any other species of fish, sea turtles, dolphins, sharks, etc. All of that is referred to as bycatch. So essentially bycatch is anything I didn't want. Now that gets separated when everything is up on the barge and does get thrown back into the ocean. But what do you know about aquatic animals and what they need to survive? They need water. So if they've been out of the water for a considerable amount of time, that bycatch is no longer alive. Because of this, scientists have projected that by the year 2050, our oceans will be completely depleted of sea life. It's about 30 years from now. How old will you be in 30 years?
45.
Mid-40s, approaching 50, right? And so imagine that time in your life where we have no sea life. You would not be able to see a sea turtle, a dolphin, a shark, etc. Now this is kind of twofold. Not only are we pulling mass quantities of things out of our oceans, that bycatch is connected. It's kind of like a domino effect. If you're killing one food source, you're going to affect another. We're also putting a bunch of stuff in our oceans. We talked about that agricultural runoff. All of that contaminates our ocean and affects sea life as well, so it's pretty significant. One of the last videos that we have for you today kind of takes into account a lot of what we talked about today with regard to agriculture and our environment, and then we're going to look at some ways that we can make an impact on the sustainability of our planet. So now that we have this information, what do we do with it, right? And I realize it's kind of a lot of information in a pretty short period of time. Some of it might be adding on to some things you already know. Others of it might be completely brand new to you. So certainly some of the athletes and celebrities that are on the screen, for a variety of reasons, whether it be health, ethical, or sustainability, have decided to follow a plant-based diet. Now, some of them follow an entirely plant-based diet, and others follow a mostly plant-based diet. It really depends on what works for them. There's lots of flexibility when it comes to that. So really that idea of a plant-based diet, how would you do it? How do you make healthier choices? How do you make more sustainable choices? It really starts with all of those foods that we already know we should be eating. They're kind of the healthiest out there for us. Your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes. Legumes are your beans, lentils, and peas. You can easily take all of those food sources and put them into what you're already eating. The idea of either adding more plants to your diet or following a plant-based diet really isn't about changing everything that you know. It's simply about looking at what you're eating in the course of the day, eating in the course of a week, and seeing, well, I could eliminate this, I could add this, and you're really eating those very same things. When it comes to grocery shopping products, there is literally a plant-based alternative to every animal-based product on the market. There's such accessibility to so many great options, whether it be simply that non-dairy milk, your soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk, lots of non-dairy yogurts, ice creams, cream cheeses, all of those kind of things. Meat alternatives as well. And companies certainly know we're all driven by taste, so if something doesn't taste good, we're not going to eat it again. So they've really grown leaps and bounds in the last several years to create products that are so very similar to the animal-based products that we're used to consuming that most people do not know the difference. Two excellent examples of burgers that are on the market, the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger. Both of these burgers are made entirely from plants but mimic the taste and texture of a beef burger so much most people would not know the difference. Both are widely available in restaurants in our area, but there is also the Beyond Burger can be found in grocery stores as well. Impossible Burger is heading into grocery stores soon, so definitely a wonderful alternative for somebody who loves a hamburger. Going out to eat doesn't have to change for you either. Most of the places, this is just a very small snapshot, most of the places that you go out to eat, whether it be with your family or your friends, all have plant-based options. So really all you have to do is be open-minded enough to grab those menus of anywhere you go, check out those plant-based options, and see if it's something worth ordering. If that particular restaurant doesn't have something that sounds good to you, then the next time you go out to eat, the next restaurant, maybe check that one out and see whether there's something there that sounds good. Even those small changes as ordering at a restaurant really do have an impact. Amazon, of course, we all shop on Amazon. If you don't have time to head to the store or there's a specific product you're looking for that you can't seem to find locally, remember Amazon pretty much has everything again that we're looking for, so keep that in mind. Now the last portion of our presentation has something to do with called cell-based meat or clean meat. Has anyone ever heard of that before? Some of us have. I found certainly some students so far today have heard of it. And so cell-based meat and clean meat are one and the same. So if you were to Google those terms, you're going to get the same information. But what it is essentially it's real animal meat that's made by recreating a process that occurs naturally inside an animal's body, but is done so outside the animal's body. And so when we're looking at this is a real meat product. So what companies are doing, they obtain a small amount of animal cells, whether that be from muscle tissue, whether that be from a feather, which you're going to learn about in a second, and they take those cells into a bioreactor, similar to how we brew beer. In that bioreactor is really where all the magic happens. They use a solution of micronutrients that have amino acids, salts, sugars, all kinds of stuff. And it allows those cells to grow. So the nourishment that they're getting is the same as that chicken would be getting, the same as that cow would be getting, and it grows into that same product. And so some of the benefits of cell-based meat, certainly from an environmental perspective, it's very, very efficient. You're looking at about 6 times more efficient than conventional farming. And we only need about 10% of those resources that we talked about. From a health perspective, certainly we're dealing with cells and not animals, so we don't have any waste. And so we're not dealing with anything like E. coli, salmonella, all of those cross-contamination issues. We also, the animals that those cells are obtained from was not injected with any antibiotics, hormones, or other drugs, so we don't have to worry about things like superbugs and superflus, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, that kind of stuff. And last but not least, we really would have no need to raise billions of animals every year. The amount of cell-based meat that can be created by one cell sample is pretty significant. One of the companies that is one of the largest producers of cell-based meat right now is called Just Foods, formerly known as Hampton Creek, if you remember seeing any of their products. Some of the cell-based meat producers are on the screen, definitely some names to keep in mind. It's interesting to kind of note that by the end of 2016, the 4 companies that were on the board were kind of all we had when it came to cell-based meat. Today we have over 24 companies, so it's definitely an industry that is growing. Another significant item to mention with regard to cell-based meat are huge agricultural companies like Tyson's and Cargill have actually invested in cell-based meat. They see that the way animal agriculture is going is not sustainable. So certainly, absolutely, they want to get in on the profit behind cell-based meat, but they also see it as an alternative as well. So as we kind of wrap up today, just a reminder that everything you heard gets to be your choice. And it's not an all or nothing approach. So this isn't about walking out today and ignoring everything that I said, although some of you will do that, and that's okay. That gets to be how you took in the information. Others of you might be thinking strongly about this idea of a plant-based diet, also an option that you have. But please know that there's a lot of gray area in between. And that means any of those changes that you make really do matter. So I mentioned going out to eat. If choosing plant-based versus animal-based when going out to eat is something that you're able to do, it makes an impact. Students will tell me sometimes, well, I can go plant-based 1 meal a day. Breakfast is pretty easy. Others will commit to an entire day of the week. So 1 day of the week, it's all plant-based eating. The other 6 days of the week are what you already do now. Know that that has an impact as well. So don't think that you kind of have to go all the way in order to actually make a sustainable impact or a healthy impact on your body or an impact on animal agriculture. So kind of keep that in mind. We have a free resource for both you and your families. His name is Matt, and he is our food coach at ECP. Not only is he a phenomenal guy, he's also a phenomenal athlete. So if there are any athletes in the room, he's absolutely somebody to kind of check out, ask some questions, etc. You can easily scan the QR code. It will take you to his Instagram page. His Instagram handle is ECP Food Coach. You're welcome again to directly message him there. Otherwise, you can simply follow the content that he puts out there. But feel free to ask him any sort of questions, whether it be how to make adjustments in the cafeteria, how do you order going out to eat, what do you have to look for, all of those kind of things. So definitely utilize him as a resource. This information will be coming to your teacher as well. I also have some brochures that have his information on the back that you're welcome to take with you.
Already done this presentation twice this morning.